Welcome to the Close the Chapter podcast. I am Kristen Boyce, a licensed marriage and family therapist with a private practice, Pathways to Healing Counseling. Through conversations, education, strategies, and shared stories, we will be closing the chapter on all the thoughts, feelings, people, and circumstances that don't serve you anymore and open the door to possibilities and the real you. You won't want to miss an episode, so be sure to subscribe. I cannot wait to share this week's episode. It was such an authentic and vulnerable conversation, which those are what feeds my soul. It's my love language. Vulnerability, authentic, deep conversations light me up. So I'm so excited to share it with you. If you haven't already grabbed the free healing guide, and it's a journal that you can reuse, grab it at www.kristen, Kristen, Boyce, boice.com/free resources. That's kristendboyce.com/free resources. It's also in the show notes. And then you're going to be in the know every week about each episode and extra resources and valuable information. So you'll want to jump on and get the guide and then join the mailing list. This is so funny because we tried to record this podcast, my guest and I. We'll introduce you to it in a minute. So many times. And what we would do is we'd get on the scheduled time we had selected and we would just have these deep, authentic conversations. I loved it. We did this for weeks and weeks. And then yesterday, we're finally like, we're going to record it. We're going to do it. And so it was just a heartfelt conversation. And I hope that comes through, that we are doing authentic friendship, not in addition to the podcast. And that warms my heart. That is what I want more of in my life. And I'm wondering if you're craving the same thing. And I hope this is helpful in creating some insight into yourself. I share, she shares about her life. And by doing that, we hope we're giving you permission to just start awakening and noticing with curiosity and compassion. What's going on inside of you? What are you feeling? What's your body telling you? So let me introduce you to my amazing dear friend and guest. Reagan, LCSW-C, is an integrative trauma therapist and coach who provides consultation on healing trauma and attachment to the therapists around the world. She hosts Therapy Chat, which is in the 1% of Spotify podcasts, and its sister podcast, Trauma Chat. In 2021, Laura founded Trauma Therapist Network, a platform for learning about trauma and finding help, which includes a searchable directory and membership community for trauma therapists. This is a great way, as a side note, if you're looking for a trauma therapist, to go to the Trauma Therapist Network to find somebody as the community is growing. And Laura believes that trauma is real, healing is possible, and help is available. Learn more about Laura's work at traumatherapistnetwork.com. She'll talk a little bit about that, but we really dive into attachment work. What is attachment work with your primary caregiver? How does it play out in your anxiety, depression, shame stories, and unmet needs? How does it manifest itself for you personally and then relationships, especially in romantic relationships and close relationships and parenthood? We talk about all of that and so much more. And my hope is you can share this with somebody that you're also in a deep connection with or want to build a deeper connection and start a conversation about attachment wounds and how they're playing out in your life, how that causes anxiety, a feeling not seen, heard, important, lovable. It's such a powerful conversation. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Reagan. Welcome to this week's Close the Chapter podcast. Thank you so much for joining me today. I cannot tell you how excited, it brings tears to my eyes, I am to have my guest today. She is so special to me, and we have been trying to do this interview for, are we on 4 weeks or 5? I don't even know.
I'm just enjoying it. I'm just enjoying the process.
It's been the most wonderful journey We keep scheduling time to do this interview, and then we just have vulnerable, heartfelt, authentic conversations. And it's been life-giving to me. And I cherish our time together. So today we're like, are we going to record today? And we decided we're going to record today. We need to record our conversations because they have such meaning and they've been so transformative in my life because we can do vulnerability and transparency and share from the heart what's really going on. So you're a gift to me and I know to many. So as the Therapy Chat host of the podcast, who's transforming lives, it's in the 1%. I need to tell the audience, you're in the 1% of all podcasts. Oh my gosh, Laura, that's incredible.
Thank you. That's just on Spotify.
Spotify. I mean, that's huge. You're in the 1%. When I read that, I was so excited for you because I love Therapy Chat and what you're doing with trauma. So welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's so beautiful to finally be being recorded with you.
I know. It's so good. So thank you so much. I know my audience resonates with vulnerability and authenticity and having real conversations. So we were talking about all the topics that we could talk about because there's so many. And
so many parallels in what we both care about and are dealing with.
Yes. And we have many passions in terms of expanding this conversation. So there was many different avenues. But as we were talking, we were really talking about the process of our parents and the journey of parenthood and the grief and attachment that can come with it and decision making. So I thought we could start with attachment. So if folks don't know what attachment is with a parent, can you explain what attachment exactly is?
Well, sure. I'll just make it kind of general, but basically your attachment with your parents is how secure your relationship is with them. And it starts at birth, how well you feel attuned to by your parents. So basically, how reliably could your parents meet your physical and emotional needs as a baby? And since most of our parents, I'm 51 now, so if you're probably between 35 and up, your parents probably didn't know anything about attachment or about children's emotional needs or developmental needs. So for most of us, our parents just really didn't know how to meet our emotional needs because theirs weren't consistently and reliably met. Maybe the people who their parents had enough money and were well enough resourced in terms of the parent was getting enough social support, they were getting enough help, they had enough money, there was an ability to provide for their own needs and your needs, then you may have grown up with a secure attachment with your caregiver. And for the rest of us, it may not have been as reliable. So it's what they used to call bonding, how well you are bonded with your caregiver, and it really comes down to trust. It's like, can I trust them to be there when I need them? And how well am I able to trust them to be there when I need them? Maybe I know they're for me in some situations, but there are a lot of other situations that I know I just can't even let them know about because they won't know what to do. That type of feeling as a child. And then when you grow up, how securely you're attached to your parent it's still affecting you throughout your whole life.
How did you discover your attachment style? How did you figure that out?
Well, I hadn't heard about it until I really didn't even hear about attachment styles until maybe 2014 or 15, maybe. I heard about attachment in terms of the bonding idea, how well you're bonded with your child. So as a mother myself, I heard about it then in the bonding perspective. But I remember when I had my son, my first child, I remember I've said this one or two times on other podcasts, but I remember I was laying in bed with my baby. I think I had just fed him. We were kind of dozing. And I suddenly thought about nephew that I loved, but I also thought was very annoying, who was about 2. So I was a mother of a newborn, and I'm thinking about my 2-year-old nephew. And I thought, oh, that sweet little angel. And then I was like, oh, why did I have that thought about him? That's not the way I normally think about him. And that was like a hormonal moment of oxytocin making me feel love and connection for a child in my life that I did love, but I didn't necessarily feel connected to that level of emotion and connection with him until that moment.
And then did you think about your own attachment style at that
Yeah.
point?
Well, but what came up right then was I thought, oh, this sweet little angel. And then I pictured my mom and I thought, how could anyone not love a baby? What's wrong with her? And it was like, oh, where'd that come from? Because I didn't have any real conscious awareness of thinking that my mom didn't love me or that she didn't love any of us children. But I can't explain that because I was not a therapist then. This is when I was 24 years old, new parent, but it was definitely an attachment experience in that moment that related to feeding my baby and then picturing my nephew. And then I had an emotional reaction about my mom, all in that 10 seconds.
So powerful. Aren't those powerful moments in your life? Because you can recall that. You remember.
I know. We're talking about more than 25 years ago, and it's like clear as day.
Clear as day.
It might be what you call an emotional flashback.
There you go. For those that don't know what that is, what's an emotional flashback?
Well, so that would be a type of trauma reaction. And in this case, it would be related to attachment. But if I looked at it now, I would say, okay, so I had a baby and then I had a flashback of a feeling of not being wanted by my mom that I wouldn't have been able to connect then that way, but I can see that as I look back on it. And like a cognitive dissonance that I had where your logical thought and your emotions don't match up. And I thought, wait, this doesn't fit. This doesn't match. So a lot of times you can tell flashbacks of any kind in a trauma reaction as something that just doesn't fit the situation. It's like, oh, why is this all happening right now? But an emotional flashback wouldn't necessarily be like a vision of a memory. It's like a memory of an emotion.
I think that's so
a little bit weird.
It's so important because people don't know, like you and I know the terms, but to explain it, I think is so helpful to people. I remember learning about attachment, and then I would go back into my dating life and I would see my anxious attachment play out with the people I dated and how insecure I felt. I didn't feel secure, which then was a mirror to my attachment wounds that I didn't know that's what that was. I felt like, well, don't you love me? Don't you want me? All those, right? That insecurity would
Why
play
am
out.
I not good enough?
Don't you want to be with me? You're always with your friends. I mean, all the things that now I look back and I go, oh, that was a mirror that I knew at the time, by the way. Like I knew, but I didn't know what it was. I couldn't name it. And so, right?
So then what do you feel about it? Shame.
Exactly. You're
right?
like, well, yeah.
You can't name it. You know, this doesn't feel right, but you're like, why am I being like this? I'm acting desperate, or I don't want this person to know how much I like them because they don't seem to like me as much.
That's reenactment of the trauma of attachment. Yes. And then I saw it again as a parenthood, like when we adopt or give birth or any form of kind of a parent role. For me, that mirrored back all my attachment wounds because I was paying attention. I was like, okay. And my fear.
Looking for your kids, you were way ahead of me.
Well, I don't know about that. My fear of reenacting the attachment was an attachment wound. My fear of I'm going to damage them. They're going to feel the same way that I felt about my mom. I don't want them to feel that way. I don't want to be my mom. That was all my attachment wound, that anxiousness mirroring itself back on my fears. So it's interesting to see how the attachment wounds play out throughout the lifetime, that trauma.
Yeah. And it's such a gift to be able to, one, it's a gift to learn about being a therapist before you have kids, because then you can actually try to apply it to what you're doing, hopefully, if you have some awareness. But also, it's so confusing because there's your whole attachment history that is your childhood and your adult relationships with everyone, your friends, your coworkers, your partners, your children, and your parents and your siblings. All of those are attachment relationships to some level, right? And then looking at your own behavior and how you connect or don't. Because, like, just thinking about it, if I had an unconscious internal experience that my mom didn't love me, and it was not in my conscious awareness, then how am I going to behave with other people about letting them like know me, or like, how much am I going to let people in if I unconsciously think that even my own mother doesn't love me? And then I'm not aware of it. So then do you like me? Do you like me? Do you want me? Do you want me? Don't reject me. Don't leave me. But also somehow playing out this unwantedness. It's like I'm seeking out people who are going to reenact that with me. And they did. So many of them did. And that also is like, you see yourself that way. Then you like, well, I don't have any idea why I'm acting like this, or even how I'm acting, but I'm getting this repeated message of rejection or like unavailability. I'm knocking on the door and you're just in there with the lights off and you're not answering.
Oh, yes. I picked many of those folks.
Yeah. Somehow that felt just right.
And
awful.
And awful at the same time. It's a powerful reckoning in my mind, in my embodiment of my body, to start noticing that, because as we were processing our parents getting older and declining in health issues, the attachment wound still is at play, unconsciously, sometimes even in subtle, subtle ways.
It's very subtle. It's pretty much invisible unless you're looking for it. It's there. It's totally happening, but we're just like in a trance. We're just like going through and thinking, I don't know. I mean, I've had 2 experiences with 2 parents of them aging and me trying to sort of wrangle with that. And I'm still going through it with both, which means they're both still alive. And I'm grateful for that. But it's like, it's so confusing because I think this is a common cultural expectation, but it could be, maybe it's just me, but I really think that I see this out there among people, that you think when my parents get older, I'll have to make some decisions about, are they going to live with me? Are they going to live in a nursing home or an assisted living facility or some kind of independent living senior place? Or when my parents get old, they'll have to make some decisions and I'll have to be clear on my boundaries about what I can do, what I can't do. I had those thoughts, but for one thing, it seemed really, really, really far off, even though my parents are in their 80s. Like, it's not that far off, right? At this point. And there's an illusion that you're going to have more control over what happens than you are actually going to have. And that brings up all the attachment wounds.
Yeah. And I find from my own journey with my mother, who recently passed, that the guilt that I didn't do enough, I didn't intervene enough, and when the truth of the matter is, I did what I could. There was nothing else I could do. I was powerless over choices and decisions. And in some cases, for some folks, they are able to take over and they are able to make some decisions, and those are hard and those are painful. In our cases, well, in this case right now, where it stands is there was nothing I could do because those choices were being made by her. And that was something I had to surrender. And that also of my role of trying to get her to see the light, talk her into getting help, facing the pain, dealing with it, advocating for us, like all of the things I kept constantly trying to get her to do. My work was over the last couple of years was to release that, surrender that. So there's a lot here in terms of our parents and decision making and the grief and the surrendering process when it comes to the attachment with a parent. Because me trying to still gain that was an attachment ploy on my end, trying to connect to my mom.
Yes.
You see, I was
Yeah.
trying to gain that connection that I craved as a child that I once had, by the way. Like my mom at one point was a very attentive, nurturing mother. And then she wasn't able to offer that anymore. So I was trying to gain that back by trying to get her help and get her to see the light and talk her into things. And that was my attachment wound playing out.
That makes so much sense.
And as you're like thinking about your parents, like trying to feel like you're helping and yet they are making their own decisions, how does that land in terms of the trauma response for folks potentially?
Yeah. Well, it's just so confusing because everything you just said, I can relate to so much. And I'm really sorry about you losing your mom.
Thank you.
And it's like one thing that can happen is you're trying to control the situation. You're feeling a loss of control. Something's happening that you don't like it and you want it to be different. And you somehow feel that you have better information about what should happen. Maybe you do. Like in both of my parents' situations, I've had, because of my work as a therapist and the exposure that I've had to a lot of people's stories and a lot of people's health issues, I do have some knowledge that could be valuable, but at the same time, I'm not in that role here. So there's like, it's hard to navigate those boundaries of where am I responsible to step in? Where am I overstepping? Where am I just trying to get them to listen to me for once? So I feel like in my situation, what I'm doing a lot is saying, I just want people to consider my perspective. It's fine if they don't follow it, but I'm just asking to be heard. I don't have to control this process, but I would like my part, I would like to be considered as part of it. But it's their life and it's their decisions. But also there's part of it where it's like you're trying to negotiate with don't go, which is also for me an attachment wound is there's so many attachment wounds that we can have. There's not being wanted would be one, being left, rejected, abandoned, all of that is my stuff. So it's like, it's not necessarily true that my mom didn't want me or she didn't love me or something, but the result of her leaving without me is that's my story, right? That's a story that my younger self still holds on to. So I guess there's like, it's weird because I'm thinking about both my mom and my dad and their health issues and the different ways that each situation has been playing out. But it's like a do-over. This time you're not going to leave me like that. This time it'll be different somehow. But the truth is that we will all die. So they will be leaving. And I think part of me is just, like you said, wanting that connection that wasn't there before or that was there at some point and trying to get it back. Part of me is saying, well, this is the time you have. So try to get as much connection as you can from it, but not trying to control the process. Mm-hmm. Like, I think that's my highest self. That's like, where can you make connection and keep connection to the extent possible? Thinking you're going to control it is not the way because that isn't connecting, right? But Yeah, that do-over feeling is really big.
Yeah, we should name it. Wanting a do-over.
The do-over, the new name for reenactment.
Yes,
Yeah.
because people can relate to that. How
Yeah.
many of us want do-overs? I mean, that is so real and authentic. I mean, that's what we crave, this deep, authentic, vulnerable connection where we're heard. Because you said, I want to be heard. I'm like, yes. And that's what I'm passionate about. Like, we all deserve to be heard and acknowledged and given permission to feel what you feel. But that's not the messaging we got, especially when we have trauma from generations. It's just not the message. We get an anxious attachment, which we feel like that anxiety just kind of lives in our nervous system, or avoidant. If you get an avoidant parent, you then aren't getting your needs met. So then you are craving. And I think as humans in general, we want to be heard. We want to feel important. We want to feel loved. We want to feel wanted.
Right. And we don't want to be invisible. We want to matter to the people in our lives, the ones that we depend on.
That word invisible, how much do you think that's connected to attachment?
Huge for me. I think so.
I don't think anyone's made that connection. Well, that I've heard at least. Feeling invisible and that power and feeling invisible, and then feeling that wherever you go.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'm going to say something about that.
Yeah, say it.
Well, it's like if your family wasn't safe, you might have needed to be invisible to escape their violent notice or their threat in some way. If there was always something going on that nobody was really telling you what it was and you could sense it, being invisible is a way to, think of every like fairy tale and Harry Potter, like there's a cloak of invisibility. It's like every kid wants that, right? So you can be there and you can know what's going on, but not be in danger at all.
You're protected.
Yeah. So if you think about dissociation, which I'm always talking and thinking about, right? Like you can make yourself invisible. Like that's metaphorically a way to be invisible. And if you've ever been around people who are dissociating a lot, oftentimes the people with them don't notice them because it's like there's a lack of presence that you can sort of feel. So the other person's sort of not feeling your energy because in a way it's like shut down. You're there, but you're not there. And as a child, if your parent, for one, is avoidant, if they're dissociating a lot, and thinking back on my family's history, there's a lot of reasons why people would have needed to dissociate a lot. Things that happened historically and within the family that were just too much. And so the way to get through it is you just either pretend it's not happening or just push through in some other way. So if your parent is avoidant and they're not really paying attention to you, then you feel invisible. So that invisible thing is really big.
It really is. And can you share more about, I've talked about dissociation, but I love you are so beautiful in how you share about it and how different it can look for different people. Can you share more about what it is, how it can manifest itself and look in various forms?
Sure. Well, I think that basically it's just so common and it's something that we all do. And I mean, I don't know about this from a research perspective, but it seems pretty obvious that animals do it too, mammals. When your nervous system is overwhelmed, anything that's too much, and you just need some distance from it, that's what dissociating is. So it can be anything from like a thought of, I just can't deal with this right now, to, I don't know if this has ever happened to you, but you're talking and the other person says something and you just didn't hear it. But there's nothing wrong with your hearing. You're right there. Let's say you're talking and the other person just says something that's like, it strikes something and you just don't hear it. And you go, what was that? Or you're talking to someone and you say something that has some emotional charge, but it's not, you're not fighting with them or anything like that, but you just say something that's touches something in them and they go, what were we just talking about? That's an example of going away in your mind, daydreaming, zoning out, narcolepsy, where you fall asleep and then you're just not there. Or it's basically, I'm trying to explain that it's like a spectrum. We all do it. Children are able to do it really powerfully and effectively as a way to protect them from losing connection with their attachment figure. When anything is happening that's overwhelming, the child has to stay connected to the attachment figure. So that means if they have to dissociate to be able to keep that connection, then that's what they have to do. So like if the parent is screaming at the child and the child's nervous system is feeling like they're in immense danger, but this is their parent and they're completely dependent on them and they need the connection, then they may go away in their mind, but they're still there with the parent. And maybe their voice is saying, okay, mommy, I won't do that again. While their mind is like, they're running through a beautiful meadow, playing in the flowers, and they're not really here because their little nervous system can't tolerate losing that connection and feeling that fear of their parent at that moment. So that part goes in the unconscious space. It's everything from that to fully developing separate identities to be able to function within unsafe or unreliably secure emotional environments.
What I notice is you have a keen curiosity and also noticing how people dissociate in different forms. So you'll name it. This is how they dissociate. They go into looking at the chart instead of being present.
Yeah.
Right? You're laying out some forms of dissociation or tasking. We've got to get this done, or we've got to do this, and almost a hyperfixation rather than being present in your body, emotionally connected to the person in front of you or the situation because of your discomfort or even an unconscious response, like just a way of functioning. You're very good at noticing different forms of dissociation. Thank you.
I've just had a lot of training and exposure to people who are dissociating because since I specialize in trauma, that's where the work is in healing trauma, is in what were you unable to tolerate while it was happening and getting you back into connection with those experiences in a way that you can tolerate is really what trauma therapy is in my
It really is.
My work.
And having a window of tolerance to be able to sit with that discomfort and those body sensations, emotions, all of the components, the sensory experience of what trauma can do. One of the things I notice in my own self or with clients and being dissociative is the breath. When you hold your breath, I notice, and it doesn't have to be necessarily holding breath, it could be rapid breath, but the breath changes. And even swallowing, noticing jaw, noticing your eyes, really attuned to your own body and the power in that to stay present through the breath.
Yeah. A lot of times as a therapist, I'll say this, but if anyone who's listening, who's either a therapist or someone who's gone to therapy or just noticed this in themselves, it's one thing that often happens with breath and dissociation is you're having a conversation in therapy and it's like a typical therapy conversation. And the therapist might say something again that they may not know that it's going to be poignant for the person, or they may not know it's going to touch a nerve, but the person will go, and then you say, oh, I just noticed that you had a sharp intake of breath. And the person will say, huh? Oh, I don't know. What do you mean? So that's like, they just relived something in a microsecond, but they don't know what it was. And you don't know what it was if you're the therapist, but that sharp intake of breath tells, don't just keep talking. That's the bottom line. As the therapist, don't just keep talking. Pause, check in. What's happening right now? What are you noticing? I heard something. Did you hear it? Usually the person will be like, no, they didn't. So that's how you can tell. Like that's one way. So the reason I say that is because like, obviously your body's reacting as you're having these memories and body sensations. All this stuff is happening in your body that your cognitive mind can't even keep up with. It moves way slower. Your body's processing all this stuff, and your cognitive mind's like, does this fit the story or not? It's always trying to figure out what's going on. So the body is like an ocean, then underwater, like what's happening under there. There's this whole life, like a coral reef, like in Finding Nemo or something. There's like this whole like little world in there.
That's
the mind doesn't even know half of it's happening.
I was wondering, how do you figure out when you're having dissociative experiences? How do you notice it? For those that are like, I don't even know where to begin to even notice.
Yeah. Well, I would say, actually, I'll just tell you, one, you can slip into a trauma response or an attachment reenactment or trauma reenactment very subtly and not know. And so it's not something to be hard on yourself about. It's really just something to be curious about and explore. But for example, like with what you were saying about the relationships and looking back and going, wow, that was my anxious attachment. Well, you didn't know it then. Your system was doing what it knew how to do because that was how it was literally formed around these experiences. And that's what happens for all of us, is that our whole way that our nervous system works is formed around these experiences of being safe or not safe and feeling seen and heard and understood, attuned to, attended to, that you matter, all of that. Your whole way of seeing the world develops around that. So what I do is, I had to learn to get in touch with my body. And that was the biggest thing. That's probably something that I've been working with for 20 years, but for the past 15 years, it was just beginning to go, what's happening here? And then as I really started to tune into my body, I realized that it's always telling me at all times what's going on inside me, right? Like if I'm nervous, if I'm confident, if I'm happy, sad, angry, my body is telling me that. So I just try to check in with my body like all day long, every day. And that just looks like literally slowing down, kind of putting my hand on my chest. And I'm doing it right now. I just closed my eyes and I'm just like,
everybody do it if you want to.
Yeah, I'm just like kind of saying inside my mind and body, like, what's present? What am I noticing right now? And just by checking in with it, slows you down a little bit, which is good. You start to feel like the energy moving through your body, and you might notice like a racing heart or sensations in your belly. So it's not like I do get words from my body. Like there will be words like, I have to go to the bathroom, or I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or sad. It'll just be like that. But oftentimes my cognitive mind wants to understand, what does this mean? What's happening? And it's not necessarily as important to know that. It's more like just as you learn to tune into your body, you just begin to know what you want and what you feel, and you begin to trust yourself more and trust your own inner guidance more. And so that is a pretty stark contrast to what most people who have childhood trauma and attachment wounds, their inner dialogue is kind of like, what should I do? What am I doing? Who's going to tell me like what's next? And it's more externally focused because that's how an insecure, anxious child would be thinking, right? Because they don't make their world. Someone else helps them make sense out of it. So tuning in that way to your body is like, you tell you what is going on and make your decisions from that point.
That describes secure attachment. Which is what I do with couples a lot of times. I'm bringing them towards each person in the couplehood feeling secure to then be able to have not even healthy, but a more connective, vulnerable, authentic relationship. Do you find that you've built up your, what we call in the therapeutic world, window of tolerance to tolerate body sensations, emotions, sensory, what pieces that come through? Is that part of the process for you? To
Yes,
tolerate
definitely.
what comes up?
Yeah, I would say, like, again, the way I see the process of therapy and trauma therapy and healing is you start out, your window of tolerance is wherever it is. And then you have all these things that you can't go there and you can't go there and you don't want to think about this and you don't want to think about that and you don't want to realize this or you can't realize it or it's just not getting through because you're still working through these patterns that relate to those early experiences and you're not consciously aware of really what you're doing. So the more you begin to be able to tolerate looking at those patterns, because you start to look at them and then you feel overwhelmed with shame and you go out of your window of tolerance down into hypoarousal or dorsal vagal shutdown, right? But the more you begin to look at them, and we talk about shame a lot, you and I, as you look at those situations and go, well, is that for me to feel ashamed about? Is that really my shameful thing? Is if I was a child and I didn't know any better, or if I was just doing what made sense when that's exactly how my family did things, or that was what I learned through my attachment with my parent or my unavailable caregiver, that's where the cognitive mind can help you make sense out of it. Oh, I see as a child, I blamed myself, but now when I look at it as my adult self, it's like, that wasn't my fault. So I think that's how it begins to expand as you have a safe, trusted person that you can hold space while you explore this. Then you're able to say, well, Kristen doesn't think it was my fault. Maybe there's also a possibility, even though I always thought it was my own fault, and maybe my parent gave me the message that it was my own fault, or it was really my parents' thing and I didn't want to blame them. And so that's why it wasn't safe for me to consider that. When you develop the capacity to hold, maybe I did this thing that was unhealthy for me, but I'm not bad, like the dualities, then it gives you the capacity to witness your own experiences through that more compassionate lens. And then, yeah, that does widen your window of tolerance. So long answer, but
Beautiful
yes.
answer. Thank you. This time went so fast. I was like, "Oop, I could keep going." I mean, I literally could do this for hours.
How about if we just do it like every Monday? Like,
that'd be awesome.
oh, I wish.
I love it so much. And I adore you. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. Where can people find more about you and your programs and what you're offering to the audience?
Well, thank you. Therapy Chat is where most people find me, and Therapy Chat is on my website, traumatherapistnetwork.com. So pretty much everything I do is there. There's a membership community for trauma therapists for their own support and a directory for people who are looking for a trauma therapist to find one. And my other podcast, Trauma Chat, which explains similar to what I was talking about here. Some of those same concepts are explained on Trauma Chat in hopefully understandable ways. So that's all on traumatherapistnetwork.com.
Traumatherapistnetwork.com. I am always talking about getting a trauma therapist. Her network is the place to go. So if you're on you've really wanted to do work and you just don't know where to find somebody, that's a great first step. Her podcast and then therapy chat, trauma chat, and then the network. So this is the opportunity to get plugged in, and then her membership community for therapists. I can't recommend all the work you're doing enough to everybody listening.
Thank you.
I am so grateful that we are souling together on this journey. And I do believe it. I do believe that.
Me
and
too.
Thank you for your heart, your time, and your energy and sharing it with us today. I'm just super grateful.
Oh, I'm so grateful too. It's good for my soul to talk to you every time. So thank you for having me on your podcast, which is such a gift that I tell people about all the time.
Thank you so much. Okay. Until the next time we do another show, another podcast, which we will. So until next time. Okay. Thanks again.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for listening to the Close the Chapter podcast. My hope is that you took home some actionable steps along with motivation, inspiration, and hope for making sustainable change in your life. If you enjoyed this episode, click the subscribe button to be sure to get the updated episodes every week and share with a friend or a family member. For more information about how to get connected, visit Kristen, Kristen, Boyce, Boice.com. Thanks and have a great day.